Report on a journey to the western states of North America and a stay of several years along the Missouri during the years 1824 to 1827 by Gottfried Duden. 15th letter, Montgomery, 1 November, 1825. Part 1, number 22. In the last letter, I tried to give you a true picture of the life of a local farmer. I well remember what ideas are widespread in Europe and especially in Germany about life in the interior of America. Sometimes they speak of terrible forest fires, which are said to endanger entire regions. Sometimes of hostile Indians, then of beasts of prey, of poisonous snakes, of scorpions, tarantulas, mosquitoes, and other insects, and finally of a host of diseases caused by the climate and the soil. I anticipate, therefore, your objection to what I have presented so far, and that I owe you far more information about the dark side. But do not worry about this. I shall not leave these regions for some time. I intend to live at least a full year on my own property in order to acquire a proper knowledge of all the adverse as well as the favorable factors, and I shall, now as before, express myself about every detail. I experienced a great forest fire recently. I myself helped to keep the fire from the farms in my neighborhood, and I can now give you a full report concerning the danger and the means of meeting it. It is a very common occurrence that during dry weather in some part of a savanna, prairie, or forest, a fire breaks out as a result of carelessness or an accident. Lightning is also frequently the cause, but sometimes a fire is started for a purpose. In the regions where the Indians are in control, prairies and forests are set on fire to restrict game to a smaller area for hunting purposes. Dry weather, dead grass, and dry foliage are the main causes for the spreading of fire, and these conditions are usually all present in the fall. The spring is usually too damp. About 3 weeks ago, a fire broke out in a prairie 6 miles from my place. At the beginning, the wind drove it in the opposite direction, and in a few hours one could see it spread a distance of 15 miles. One can easily understand why fire spreads very quickly on the prairie, but it disappears just as quickly since there is only dry grass and no wood to keep the fire burning. It is different in the forests, where fire spreads because of the foliage. It is also consumed quickly. However, it makes its way to the dead trees, already lying on the ground or still standing, which furnish fuel for the fire for several days. During the first weeks, we hoped to remain undisturbed because the fire had been driven away from the woods close to us. It could now reach us only by a long detour through the forests on the opposite side of the prairie. In the meantime, rain was expected. I was curious enough to ride up to the fire, but found it hardly worth the effort. By daylight there is not much to look at least one cannot speak of a terrible spectacle unless there are evergreen woods nearby, which are lacking in our vicinity. To be sure, there are green deciduous trees which catch fire immediately, even when large logs from them are placed on the hearth. This is true especially of the hackberry tree. But standing trees burn only when they are dead. If a dry trunk leans against a green tree, the latter can suffer from the heat of the burning dry wood, but the fire is extinguished when the dead wood is consumed. I stated earlier that there is no heat here. The fire kept at a safe distance from us for an entire month. Only in the evening was there a bright illumination on the horizon. But the rain did not come, Instead, the direction of the wind changed to our disadvantage and finally blew so strongly that there was no doubt that we would soon see the fire here on Lake Creek. Lake Creek, next to which my farm is situated, derives its name from a lake that it forms before entering the Missouri. It flows from north to south. Its course to the lake is about 5 miles long, and after it has been joined by several tributary brooks, its bed is rather wide and deep. It is never dry, to be sure, but it is full only during heavy rains. The upper part of the small river, as well as its tributaries, winds through deep, narrow valleys that are usually covered with sugar maples to the top of the adjoining hills. There are 8 settlements within its drainage basin. The fire came from the northeast side and first reached the ravines of Lake Creek. Twilight was approaching when the owner of the farm where I had formerly stayed invited me to take a walk in that direction. We wandered in a deep, narrow valley until we came close to its division into several ravines. It was dark when we arrived there, and it seemed just the right moment to observe the terrible element at the moment of its greatest glory. It would be useless to try and give you a picture of what I saw. The imagination of the boldest painter would scarcely attain this reality in a portrayal of hell. The fire, driven by wind, had first spread along the bottoms of ravines, and from there it rapidly climbed simultaneously in many individual trails to the tops of the hills. The black curves of ravines were strangely illuminated by burning trees 80 to 150 feet tall, and trails of flames on the hills resembled glowing streams, plunging down the hills to be lost in the dark depths below. The entire spectacle retained its terrible character for a long time, while most multifarious changes in detail occurred. The crashing and roaring of plunging oak and gigantic plane trees, and the flying about of burning masses, were the usual interruptions, while the howling of the wind seemed to pursue the flight of desperate wild animals. I saw deer, squirrels, foxes, wolves, raccoons, opossums, horses, and cattle escaping the common enemy, all at complete peace with each other. On the following day, farmers began working to keep the fire away from buildings and fences, which would probably all have been destroyed without these precautions. As soon as the fire is rather close and the hope of being spared by it disappears, a line is chosen by the people of the neighborhood to serve as the fire line. Generally, they try to make use of a road. Along this line, a space about 3 to 4 feet wide is carefully cleared of leaves and dry wood by means of brooms or rakes, including any dead trees that could fall across this borderline when set afire. After such preparation, the foliage on the fire side of the line is set afire, and extreme care is observed that flames do not reach the opposite side without being extinguished immediately. The work is easy, and in a short time all combustible material near the fire line has been burned up. The fire can then spread only in the direction of the forest fire, and the farms are safe from any danger without further effort. In carrying out these precautions, they choose a moment when an adverse wind will not be too great a hindrance. If they wanted to let the forest fire come closer, they would depend in this case entirely on chance. However, great difficulties would be encountered in fighting the fire because it spreads in an incalculable way. Besides, fire does great damage to forests. The fertilizing foliage is lost, and the young growth is partly destroyed, partly damaged. This reason alone makes it advantageous to limit the fire as much as possible. But the destruction of the pasturage is even more deplorable, and with reason if the fire has encircled the farm. The fire rarely extends to the valley of the Missouri, perhaps only during a severe drought. This fall there was danger of such an occurrence, but the farmers there had already made preparations to meet it when suddenly a 2-day rain fell and stopped all further spreading. You may judge from this report how much danger there is from forest fires. If a farm suffers from such a fire, the owner is seldom without blame. At least no one fears forest fires here. The same is also true of all snakes, especially of rattlesnakes. There are 3 kinds of rattlesnakes here, particularly those with large yellow spots. I have seen several, and I have killed some. They are not so frequent in my neighborhood. At first, I went to see them out of curiosity whenever one had been killed. None are longer than 4.5 to 5 feet and more than 2.5 inches in diameter. 2 months ago, one this size was found in my fields and killed with an axe. However, I consider such an attack dangerous because the weapon is too short. A long-handled hoe would be more suitable. The snake usually assumes a defensive position, coils up in a circle, rattles its tail, and extends its open jaws toward the attacker. In this position, it can quickly move forward the distance of its entire length. One cannot call it jumping because the tail does not leave the ground. It can quickly coil itself again and strike again. The rattling sound is similar to that of a scissors grinder. I cut the snake open and found rat and a species of thrush in its stomach. The 2 poison fangs in the upper jaw were more than an inch long. I extracted them and through one of them pushed a hog's bristle through its entire cavity so that it came out at the point of the fang. I did not notice any disagreeable odor. I have also encountered vipers and copperheads. Neither is much more than a foot long, but just as poisonous as the rattlesnake. Indeed, the copperheads are considered more poisonous. At any rate, I believe that they are more dangerous. If the rattlesnake is not attacked, either it crawls away from people, or it reveals its presence by rattling. But the copperhead lies still, and as soon as a person approaches on foot too closely, tries to bite. The viper also retreats a little, emitting hisses through its jaws like an angry cat. All these creatures cause less worry here than mad dogs in Europe. They usually appear only on hot days. A rider has nothing at all to fear from them. But one must bear in mind that Negroes and whites often roam barefoot through the woods for days in order to kill game. It is true that the nearness of a poisonous snake has some effect on everyone, especially on women, but only for a short while. Afterward, it is completely forgotten. Areas where many snakes live together in colonies, as it were, are rare and soon become well known. One of my neighbors showed me a place, an area of several hundred paces in length and width, which 8 years ago had been completely covered with rattlesnakes. They seemed to retreat from human settlements. Rattlesnakes love the south side of Stony Hills. Only on hot days do they leave their subterranean holes, a habit of land snakes in general. There are also poisonous water snakes here. In other words, those that stay in water most of the time, but come to dry land occasionally. To these belong the so-called water moccasins. Near the first dwellings of farmers, a species of small, harmless toads is usually found whose presence is considered a sure sign that snakes are absent. Stories are told of snakes crawling into houses and even into beds. Several weeks ago, one of my neighbors found a snake sleeping quietly in a sugar barrel. It was an innocent, beautiful creature, and is called a garter snake here. Once, the housewife went into the smokehouse to get some meat and heard rattling in a corner, and when she stepped closer, she saw a small rattlesnake. On another occasion, a setting hen made a pitiful noise. Someone ran up and found her sitting on eggs encircled by a black snake. There are many black snakes here, some of which are 8 to 9 feet long. Their bite is not poisonous, but they can be irritated to such an extent that they follow the enemy for long distances.